All right, we got a special edition of a Suns extravaganza tonight. I'm joined by Eric Lopez. You know him from many stops, including Black and Gold Banneret in the Circle podcast. He is also a member of the Around the Kingdom trio here with myself and Trace. And then happy to have Ben Hazel on with us. Ben is a longtime coach, scout, player, has been around basketball a ton, spent a bunch of time at UCF, and we thought it was a great opportunity. Schedule came out today. So now we know UCF's Big 12 opponents. We know the full schedule. And so it's never too early to get a breakdown. You know, we got football season going on right now. I'm really excited about that, but we thought it'd be a great opportunity to talk some hoops tonight. And Ben, first off, man, we're really appreciative of you joining us, and thanks for taking the time to spend some time with us tonight going over the schedule.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Really been looking forward to this one. Really excited about the season. So, any chance I get to talk about the Knights in their upcoming season, definitely jump at it. So appreciate you guys having me.
Well, Ben, you don't have to prove anything to me and Eric. I'm pretty certain you could beat us both in a 2-on-1, probably like 15-0 right here, playing by twos. But for the rest of the audience, give us a little bit of your background. Where'd you play at, and what have you been working on the last couple of years in the coaching space?
Yeah, so originally from the DC area, so had the chance to play alongside a handful of pros. Of course, in my vote, always will argue the DC area is the best area for basketball. But that led me to playing basketball at Princeton University. Had some pretty decent seasons there. We went to the tournament one year where we ended up losing to Kentucky at the buzzer. They ended up going to the Final Four with Brandon Knight and those guys. But have a long-standing relationship with Coach Dawkins, Kelvin Johnson. He coached me in middle and high school. They played an integral part in my upbringing and been a huge Knights fan, especially ever since Coach Dawkins came on staff. Had the opportunity to join the staff over the last 2 years. And right now, really what I've been doing as far as with basketball is just player development stuff and just really staying in it with working guys out. Had the luxury of working out Taylor. He was in town a few weeks ago, so got to reconnect with him and spend some time on the court, but still kind of, really involved in that aspect. But and that's what I think, really led me to really want to hop on this call.
Yeah, take us through what does a development coach do? What are some of the things that you kind of work on? Give us kind of the behind the scenes sort of lowdown look.
Yeah, so it's all on the court. So for me, of course, they have their trainers and the guys that they, hit the weights and do all the conditioning stuff with. But what I specialized in or focused on was all on the court stuff. And the thing that kind of really, it gets really a little bit more into the details of who the player is, what they're trying to get better at. One thing that you do or really can separate yourself as far as the training is working out guys that you've seen play, see where they get their shots. And then giving them different options that they can go to when the moment comes, when they get the ball in those different situations or different places they can move. So those are all the things that you're trying to perfect in practice. So spending a lot of time outside of practice, before practice, really just working with guys individually on some things that are specific to their game.
Pretty excited. And I could see I could see you and Coach Dawkins hitting it off. He from DC. Come on, like that's an obvious move. Describe what's it like being around Coach Dawkins, who's now, by the way, college basketball Hall of Famer. Johnny Dawkins got recently inducted into the Hall of Fame. You get to see him behind the scenes. I've gotten to know him a little bit, obviously, over the years. But what's he like?
Coach Dawkins, I mean, with these past 2 years, I mean, actually, when I was coming up, he was at Stanford. And I actually wanted to play for him, but, wasn't at that level, I guess. But Coach Dawkins is a guy that I look at, especially now with being on the staff, as a guy that I, would have killed to play for. He's just an all-around great guy. The number one thing that stuck out with me with really getting behind the scenes with him, especially these past few seasons, was that his care for the kids on the team as basketball players and as people is something that never wavers. Like that's something that he's always has on his mind. He's always willing to kind of go the extra mile. But I think one thing as far as the UCF faithful, I think people, see the mild-mannered side. He's definitely always very professional. He's a consummate professional. But, behind the scenes, you really get to see a little bit of that fire. I mean, he wasn't, who he was as a basketball player because he was nice to everybody. So and that's one thing that you really get to see when you get to know him and see behind the scenes, like, hey, he gives you the politically correct answer in the interviews and in the media room, but he brings a different type of energy and a different way of saying things, when we get to practice, workouts, and film sessions. That's for sure.
That's unbelievable. Because your coach, full disclosure, I just realized I was at that game you played against Kentucky, the buzzer beater. I was in Tampa, Florida.
Yep, yes, it was. It was
Kentucky I think they ended up beating West Virginia in the next round and get to the Sweet 16 and make that run like you talked about. Was that John Thompson III was the head coach, or who was your head coach at that time?
Sidney Johnson. So that's the coach right. before Mitch Henderson. So Sidney Johnson, and then he ended up after that season taking the job at Fairfield, which was, relatively interesting move. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into play for a coach that people don't necessarily take into consideration, like their family being one major component. But, he ended up taking that job. And I mean, he was the guy that recruited me. It was a season that I'll never forget. So we're definitely a little heartbroken to have that buzzer beater. Brandon Knight, who was a pro, he was 0 for 9 at that time, and ended up going 1 for 10 for the game, and that one shot being a buzzer beater. So
at the Ice Palace in Tampa,
he did it to North Carolina later in that tournament, which was made us feel a little bit better. But he had, I think, 20 plus that game. So.
Yeah, he got going at that point. I mean, that was in the Ice Palace in Tampa where the Lightning play by Ybor City. I remember that. I drove all the way and caught that game. I think people were tuned in. One thing we've learned, Adam, he's been around a lot of great coaches that know what they're doing. And by the way, he's a Princeton graduate. So I think we already know the IQ level has gone up.
Yeah, look, the odds were stacked against us to start this, Eric. We knew that coming into this, but Ben, take us behind the scenes as a player right now. Obviously, we got to see the schedule today. Did the players have any sense? I mean, do they have a look or a peek at the schedule before it kind of gets released to the public, or were they seeing it for the first time today too?
They're seeing it for the first time. So you don't, like, as far as the players are concerned, they know the teams that they're going to play for the most part. But, they know what's ahead as a whole. So as far as the details of who's coming when, they don't necessarily ask too much about it, and they don't really know, even though they probably could find out a little bit earlier. But pretty much when we know is when you guys know.
Is it exciting for them? Is it a day that they look forward to? Is it a day that, like, when it releases, everyone kind of gathers around and starts talking about who they're playing or where they're playing at, all that stuff?
They definitely do when it comes out. I wouldn't say they have the date circled because it's not necessarily sure when it's going to happen. But when it does come out, you definitely are looking down the road like, okay, all right, now we kind of know what this thing's going to be shaping up like. We kind of know, like where the tough patches are going to be in the season, the big games, the games that you're going to have circled and starred. So the schedule coming out is a big deal for a lot of people.
Especially this year being in the Big 12 and the number one conference in all of college basketball. I don't even think that's even debatable. The RPI sets it, the success they've had in the league. So I would imagine there's got to be some extra excitement, not only from the players and the coaches that this schedule is finally out, but also from the family members, right? Because I guarantee you they're going to be bugging their, hey, can you get us on the pass list? Can you get tickets? There's going to be high demand. I know from what I understand, tickets are up for the home games, and rightfully so, as we'll get into the schedule in a moment. But I got to imagine there's going to be a lot of hoopla around the players because of people wanting tickets. Hey, can you get me tickets here? Can you get me, travel plans too? Family members maybe want to travel.
100%. 100%. I mean, with the Big 12, I mean, they've been talking about this stuff well before we actually got in the Big 12. We played Oklahoma State last year, and the conversation was, hey, let's see how we stack up. Let's send a message. Like, let's let guys know, like, they're not as familiar with us. We're familiar with them, but we can compete with these guys. So that was a topic of conversation even last year. So with that coming out, all of the things that come with it, the fanfare, your friends hitting you up saying they want to come to games a lot more often, people that you typically don't talk to asking for tickets now. So any ticket that's unused by a player will probably get gobbled immediately. So yeah, I mean, it's all excitement that you know is coming, and you just, as a player, those are the things that you want.
In other words, we have a hard ticket to get, Adam. So we can't.
I'm
we
with you.
ask
I'm gonna tell him I know Eric Lopez when I get to the gate. So Ben, obviously, I know college basketball and college sports in general these days, obviously dominated by transfer portal, guys coming in, guys coming out, people moving around. So what do you know so far about this year's team? I know we have some returning pieces, leaders in Darius Johnson, athletic guys like CJ Walker. So I know we got some returning pieces. Obviously, brought in some veteran transfers. What do you know so far about this team? If you've been able to look at them or kind of people you talk to, what do you think this team is looking like, or what's their makeup going to be when they finally get on the court?
So I think, and this is just pure speculation on Coach Dawkins' strategy, at least. I think it'll be similar to past and trying to play fast. He did a lot of that last year and the year before, and I think that trend will continue. As far as the energy around the team, of course, the guys are coming in from a lot of different places, and we're able to produce different things at their various schools, which you're always wondering how that translates. I mean, everybody's even wondering that. Just as a team coming from the American Conference, how that's going to translate to the Big 12. So really what people have done in the past doesn't really, everybody's kind of getting a clean slate. But one thing that I will say that I've noticed just with having to work guys out, I typically work guys out at night. But every single time that I've stepped foot in that gym, there are, a bunch of guys on the team putting in extra work, getting their shots up. So it really kind of goes back to, guys knowing the challenge that's ahead. And I think the guys that they have now coming in really understand it and really have embraced it. And they're really looking at this as like, hey, this is a big opportunity for themselves on an individual note, which is great to see. One of the bright spots, I mean, we got a lot of guys coming in from a lot of different places. I think we'll have a little bit more depth at the big position next year, which I think will be pretty exciting, or at least, I think that'll be something that Coach Dawkins will like there. And we have a lot of guards, a lot of athleticism on the wings. So it all lends to playing fast. And I think that's something that Coach Dawkins will lean on. But I think the identity for us to have the success that we can have is something that Coach Dawkins preaches every year, which is, just really holding your hat on that defensive end. In this conference, with the type of teams we play and the places that we're going to have to play in, the main thing that you're going to have to rely on to get wins, which you've seen in that conference time and time again, is on the defensive end.
Definitely intensity. And I think two guys that could help that, CJ Walker and Darius Johnson. Ben, I keep reminding people about last year because, we get to the NIT, just missed the NCAA. And I remind people, CJ Walker only played 4 games. If we kind of forget that, this is an impact player inside that UCF basically didn't have. Darius Johnson missed the beginning of the season, and I felt personally that he wasn't healthy the whole year. He just didn't look like himself the year before. I'm not asking you to speculate on what went behind his injuries behind the scene, but my point is, I think I look at those two guys. I would think there is going to be some hunger with those two guys, and for this team to have success, it's going to start with those two.
100%. In Darius Johnson, so a little background on my relationship with that guy is that his dad coached me in middle and high school, so I've known him since he was born. And one thing about that kid is he works. That guy puts his work in, almost to the effect of we're telling him you need to chill out. You really need to rest. You're coming off an injury, but all he knows is work. So I think he's really been, putting the time in to come prepared for the challenge that he has ahead. And CJ Walker, I mean, like you said, guys are knowing that their time or the opportunities to showcase what they have is really, coming to an end. So CJ is a guy that you look at like, hey, he had really high expectations or a really high ceiling, has had spurts where he really showed that, and he can definitely do it, which we all know. It's just getting that opportunity to really put together a full season. And I think for him, he's like, hey, I get to come in healthy. People are going to be relying on me. I'm going to have a lot of responsibility. And that's something that he's really embraced and really looks at as a chance for him to show, really all the talent that he does have.
I thought he helped them win the Oklahoma State game in the Bahamas. They're guarding Cisse down the stretch. And as it turns out, it's the last time we saw him on the court. And I maintain, Ben, if Walker's healthy the whole year, I think we're an NCAA tournament team last year. I know people don't like hearing excuses on that, but he's that impactful of a guy. So fingers crossed, Ben. We got to keep these guys healthy, Ben. We got to keep these guys around. That's the goal.
That's always the name of the game. I mean, keeping guys healthy. And the funny thing is about what you said with CJ Walker and us making the NCAA tournament. If you look at our quad one wins and the margins that we lost by, especially going into the conference, I mean, a CJ Walker, it's like we don't even need him to get 20. It's like he's such a versatile guy that his presence without even scoring would have helped us enough to really get us over the hump in some of those games. His athleticism, his ability to guard, his ability to rebound, those three things alone at the level that he does it at, that could have been a decide that I believe, just like you do, Eric, like if we had that guy, we would have probably had a few different outcomes in some of those close games.
Yeah, he's an energy guy too, right? He's an energy guy. He's a guy who's gonna, you're not gonna run a lot of plays for CJ, but he's gonna get put back dunks, he's gonna get blocks, he's gonna get tip ins, and sometimes that kind of stuff really gets the energy of your teammates up when you're seeing somebody like that who's hustling, who's kind of scrapping for points. And he may not always stuff the stat sheet with double doubles, right? But he's gonna have 6, 8, 10 points that are really impactful. And so I agree with Eric. I think we missed that sort of energy and that leader on the team. Probably, before you got to UCF, Ben, but we had a player named Chad Brown who was very much like that same player, right? Ran the floor, caught a bunch of lobs, was always there around the basket, did the dirty work in those BJ and Taco teams. And CJ kind of reminds me a little bit of that mold, right? Where he's that guy who's you're not gonna throw down to the block 7 times a game to him, but he's still gonna get his, and he's gonna play an all-around game too. And I agree with Eric. I think we missed that a ton last year.
Would have been a great compliment to Taylor Hendricks. That's one of my what ifs in all of UCF athletics. What if we would have had CJ Walker and Taylor Hendricks for a full year? People forget that, but those things matter, and that's what that's.
I mean,
that's
to piggyback even on that is I remember Taylor's first workout and first week of workouts over the summer, right? And you had CJ Walker in there, and CJ Walker I think played a part in Taylor reaching what Taylor became, right? So you have those moments coming in as a freshman. Coming out of high school, what's the difference between high school and college? What is the difference? And CJ showed him the difference the very first week. He definitely showed him the difference. Taylor took that and ran with it, as we saw, and took it to a whole nother level. But I definitely think he played a part in showing him like, hey, this is how, this is where your athleticism can show up. This is how you can make plays. This is how you got to play above the rim. This is how physical you have to play defensively, getting rebounds. This is how fast you have to run. So I think he was a part of, kind of his first showing of this is the level that you really need to be at. And then, Taylor turned it into his own thing and really, really took it to the next level.
Well, unfortunately, we're not going to have Taylor for the schedule this year, Ben. So let's hop in a little bit, though, and take a look at UCF's schedule. And really, one of the things that really hits me off the bat is Coach Dawkins really gets an opportunity to test his team early. Second game of the year, Ben, going down to Miami, a Final Four team from last year. Yeah, they have some different guys on their team, but what do you make of that strategic move by Coach Dawkins, putting his team in that tough of an environment against this team so early in the season?
Well, with Miami, I mean, we've played them for the past few years. And I think both him and Coach Larinaga like that challenge. They like that in-state game. They like the travel, so it's not too far. And it's a move that Coach Dawkins really likes, and he really likes that game. I think as you've seen, it's always been a good one. It was a good one last year, and it was a good one the year before. And with Miami, they're a pretty interesting team to schedule early. They got a lot of new pieces. They got the transfer from Florida State, Cleveland at the point guard spot, and they got the kid Nigel Pack coming back. So they got a lot of leaders returning, and so do we. So that one will definitely be a game to watch, or a game that'll be circled on all the guys' schedules for, kind of an early test to see what type of team we have, because that's what coaches are really wondering with the transfer portal being what it is.
Pro teams won the last two meetings there, going back to 2 years ago. UCF went to Miami, won there on a Saturday in a wild shootout. And then last year it came down to the last shot in the game, and Miami won. And I remember talking to guys. We thought Miami was a really good team. Two teams I remember last year that the coaching staff was super impressed with was Miami and Missouri. We saw the years those two teams ended up having. I don't know if anybody envisioned Miami to the Final Four, but it was a really good test. And to me, the other game that jumps out to me, Ole Miss.
Yep.
Ben, that's a big one. New coach, Chris Beard, ironically, Big 12, former head coach at Texas Tech. Yep. And, of course, Texas, we know what happened with off the court and all that stuff, but Chris Beard's a very good coach. And, UCF beat Ole Miss last year, but that's going to be interesting with a new coaching staff. So, unlike Miami, where you mentioned Larinaga and Dawkins, they know each other so well and they've been there forever. This is an adjustment where you're playing the same school for the second year in a row, but they have a new coach.
Yep. So, I mean, those are the two probably biggest non-conference games that we'll have coming up. A sleeper one I would probably put is the South Dakota State game. But going to Ole Miss, they're, like you said, they're very well coached. I mean, they were last year. It was definitely, we put a pretty good pounding on them, especially early. If you remember that game, we were up, I think, 20-0 to start that game, which was pretty abnormal. So I think that's going to be a tough game. They actually added the kid Musa, who went to Oklahoma State last year. So the 7-foot center, the big kid, he's at Ole Miss. So they're going to be a tough team. I mean, luckily we have them at home. That's the biggest kind of takeaway I had. I think that's one thing that players do pay attention to. It's their number of home games, of course. Like you said, with the tickets, you got to know what games I'm going to even need them for. So with having Ole Miss come home, I think that's kind of, a good little ramp up as we, are really just preparing for what's to come.
The other thing that's interesting about the schedule is we don't leave the state of Florida, right? Yeah. I mean, all our games are at home, or we have at Miami and then at Jacksonville. Do you think that was strategic on the part of Coach Dawkins to keep the team in state to minimize the amount of travel in the non-conference?
I do think the amount of home games was strategic. I think, really as you're getting to know what type of team that you have, you want to do it with the support of your fans, just so they can get to know these guys, but also we can kind of be as comfortable as we can as far as the not having to travel and all of that stuff, because once the conference starts, that travel is going to get crazy. So you want to, with our conference shaping up the way that it has, you really you want to get as many home games as you can. It kind of reminds me of the year, if you guys can remember back to the Marcus Jordan days, when I was at Princeton, we actually did play against those guys. So we came to the Christmas tournament. We played against those guys when they were ranked. They didn't end up having that great of a conference season, but they came in, they were undefeated going into the conference. They played 10 home games and 1 neutral site where they beat Florida. So, there is some method to the madness with scheduling those home games. I think it'll kind of give guys the right boost and the right feel that they need to really put their best foot forward once that conference comes around.
Oh, and you mentioned South Dakota State. That's a sneaky mid-major team that's been up. It's a consistent winner now. 20 wins. They've not made the NCAA. They've won their league. That's going to be in Adam Eaton's backyard. So tell us a little bit about what Adam's going to be there. So what is he going? What should he expect to see up there in that St. Augustine area?
Yeah, so South Dakota State, they got a lot of high major transfers. That's the number one thing that you'll see with mid majors these days, is that you'll see a lot of high major guys that played at, the blue blood schools. So they have a kid that went to Wisconsin, kid that went to Wyoming, kid that went to Nebraska. The kid that went to Nebraska played there last year. He was their starting point guard. He's really good, was actually sat out most of their season. That's hurt. So South Dakota State has some pretty good returners that have been exposed to, the high level basketball. So that shock of playing the big schools won't be there. They're always well coached. They're projected to be one of the contenders in their conference. So, that's a sleeper game that, when you first look at the schedule, you're like, who's South Dakota State? But it's a game that I know Coach Dawkins, if they come out and win that game, like I think they should, it's one that, behind the scenes, they'll definitely hang their hat on, like, hey, we're trending in the right direction. We're doing the right things, because in order to even compete with mid-majors that are projected to win their conference and do good things, you have to play well and you have to be disciplined in doing so. So I think that game will be a test of that. I do think we do have enough to win, but, it is a game that I wouldn't take lightly. And that is one of the few games that we have that is not at home.
All right, Ben, I need you to take off your coach hat for a second. You're going to be a media guy. I need you to put your media hat on, right?
Right.
12 non-conference games, right?
Mhm.
How many? I know as a coach, you want to take it one game at a time. You want to win them all. What do you think is a fair or reasonable expectation for wins in the non-conference? So out of the 12 games, what's a number that you would be happy if I said, hey, we won 7, we won 8, we won 9? Where would you be happy?
A number with the 12 non-conference games, I want to say around 9 or 10 going into this Big 12 season. I mean, and in that, I put conservatively in the sense of saying like, hey, we have a solid team with that. But if we have a good team, we can come in with, close, maybe 11. That Miami game will be tough, but I think we can compete with Miami. We can compete with Ole Miss. And then the other ones, if we stay disciplined, I think, with the talent that we have, we can come out, with the string of wins going into this conference.
All right, you heard it here first. Ben says undefeated non-conference. Just kidding. But how important is the non? I mean, we're going to get to the Big 12, and no secret. Again, Eric said it. It's obviously the top basketball conference in the country. A lot of tough games on that schedule. A lot of really good teams on that schedule, and we'll talk about that side in a second. Wins are going to be tough to come by in some of those places, right? In some of those games. So, how important is it to get off to a good start in the non-conference, knowing that once you get to the conference schedule, things ramp up really, really quickly, and you're gonna be in a lot of tough games.
Well, the way that it changes a little bit, right, with being in the Big 12. So instead of it being, hey, we need to win these games to make it to the tournament, it's more of, hey, we need to win these games so that the league that we're going into is on notice that we are a team that's coming to play. So it's a little bit different than, hey, we got to make sure we win this second game of the season because last year we only played, I think, 7 or 8 quad 1 games over the entire season, right? So that's including the non-conference, the Missouri, the Miami game, stuff like that. You have to win them. So those close games, if we do win those, we'll have a much better record as far as our quad 1 games are concerned. But now you're not searching for quad 1 games. You don't have to search for it. So you can come out of your non-conference and lose all the games. And if you come through your conference in the Big 12 and finish 500, you might be on the bubble. So it's just completely different. It's completely different. We'll double up quad 1 games in conference alone. So add in that Miami game, and we'll see if Ole Miss is one. We have more than enough opportunity as far as NCAA bids concerned, but we all know like they kind of run together. So you want your non-conference when you're going into those games. You want to be feeling good. You want to feel like kind of what your identity is, what we have to do to win, what we're going to hang our hat on, those things.
We won't definitely not have trouble finding quad 1 games this year or anytime soon. That is a fact. But it is important because, I think back to last year, like because Darius was hurt, CJ Kelly was playing the point, which really paid off down the stretch later in the year. So you find out things about this team that you didn't know you could do during non-conference. What's a couple things you're looking forward to finding out about this group when they get on the court? I think a lot of people are going to be curious about Taylor Hendricks' brother, who obviously redshirted last year. He was, had an injury. Obviously, some new faces. Coach Dawkins, this is part of college basketball now. So part of building that chemistry there in that culture. What are you looking forward to find that you're curious about this roster?
The main thing, and probably the only thing that I really look for as a former player and a coach is it's really just how these guys respond to adversity. I know you hear that cliche, and like as a former player, you're like, I hear that all the time, but it's really the name of the game. The teams that are able to really stay focused on the next play and really just kind of not let that affect their effort when things aren't going their way is the teams that have the most success over the season, especially in this conference that we have coming up, because that is what it is a tale of. You're going to be tested on Monday. You're going to be tested on Thursday. You'll be tested next Monday. Every single game is going to pose a big time challenge. We don't have the ECUs. We don't have Tulsas. Every game is going to pose its own threat and test, and they're all not going to go correctly. But it's really just kind of how these guys respond, how these guys continue to fight. That's the only difference, I think, between us being a tournament team and us not being a tournament team is just having those little mental lapses once or twice. And I'm not even saying it happens a lot. It just has to happen once or twice at the wrong time. And then that kind of puts you behind the 8 ball. So with that game, like against Miami, if we do not win, how we look when we play Cal State Fullerton, and how we look against San Diego State, and how we look when we come up to Ole Miss as another big challenge, and how these guys are accepting those challenges. Because the talent is there at this level. These guys are that good. Like, we know a CJ Walker, we know Darius Johnson. I mean, he had 20-some points against Miami last year in his first game back. Like, the guys are talented enough to perform at the highest level. It's really just getting them in the mental space to do so is literally the difference.
Ben, the schedule makers did not do us any favors with the start of the conference schedule. So if you take BYU out, Kansas State won 26 games last year. Kansas won 28. Texas won 29. BYU won 19. Houston won 33 rather. They did not do us any favors with that start of the schedule. What do you make of that opening gauntlet that UCF's going to face?
Welcome to the Big 12. That's what I make of it. It's just literally, hey, man, we wanted this, and this is what you want, especially as a player and a coach, and just as a city. This is what we want. I mean, we got Kansas coming to town. We got BYU, Texas. Like, they're all coming to our place, which is something that a few years ago would never be a thought. So this is what we want. As far as the challenge is concerned, this is what we want. So, it is interesting considering where we are going. I think this is kind of, again, piggybacking off of how they respond at Kansas State, at Kansas, or having Kansas come to our place. And then you got BYU, which is more in those games of, hey, I look at that game as like, hey, this is a game that, we could kind of look at it as we could really, get a win here. The other one's like, hey, it's a challenge that we're going to go after it, but but it's in the middle of Kansas State, Kansas, Texas, and Houston. So, can we forget about that? Are we not looking ahead that we had Texas and those top-ranked top 5 teams that they'll probably be preseason?
Well, I was going to say, Ben, could this work to use in a weird, strange way? Look, every game's hard in the Big 12, so we're gonna find positives here. Is it better to get them early because they don't know you? They're going to be, UCF. You're going to hear. I think we're going to hear this term a lot. Trap game, right? Like a Kansas comes to UCF for the home opener, UCF, which just blows my mind away. Which is we'll get to that. But Kansas has got 2 marquee games in between that. So do they look ahead? Do they not respect? You know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, in a way, get them early instead of later in the year. By that time, they kind of have all this film and they kind of know you. And am I crazy for thinking that you're going to play them anyway? Maybe get them early when they don't. Maybe they're underestimating you.
Yes, that is an angle. You know what I mean? That is definitely an angle. But in this conference, I think guys look at their overall resume more than in other conferences, just because in the American, you have those resume games circled. Those are the biggest games of the conference. Whereas here, they look at this thing like, hey, we just don't want to drop any games unnecessarily when we're talking about our resume. So early on, I don't think teams will, take us lightly. They might look ahead a little bit like, hey, I know we're playing UCF during the week and we have another big game coming this Saturday. But again, in this conference, it's not really one where, they're even used to trap games. I mean, their old trap game last year, West Virginia?
Pretty much. And even then, going to Morgantown ain't easy. Yeah,
exactly. So these guys this conference, you're conditioned. You're conditioned for every game mattering. I think probably the biggest advantage that we have is our home and away schedule of having kind of more winnable games with the home and away teams that we have. Cincinnati, BYU, Houston will be tough, but the team that we're familiar with, we always, play pretty close games with them. Texas Tech, not really one of the teams that projected to finish in the top 3-4 teams in this conference. So we're going to get a good lay of the land, but I think we have a good opportunity to kind of shock some people with the teams that we're playing home and away with.
But obviously, and this is going to sound like I'm taking a shot at some of these schools, but I'm really not. But obviously, the environment at ECU, the environment at Tulsa, the environment at Temple is obviously a lot different than what you're going to face at Kansas State, at Texas, at Houston. Obviously, UCF's used to playing in Houston, but do you think that'll change the dynamic of the team? I mean, is there credence to playing a sleepy road game where the crowd's not into it and the energy's not there. Do you think even though these are going to be tougher games, the fact that the environments are different will have UCF responding differently?
100%. 100%. The way it shows up. I mean, last year we dropped a tough one to USF. Had a few disappointing ones, and that is kind of leans on the, hey, I know it's a rivalry game, but we're at USF. We drove down. We're going right back home. It's not really that packed. It's not overwhelming energy in here. We got to bring our own energy, things like that. You'll never hear that next year. As far as the Big 12, like that's the thing that the Big 12 holds their hat on. Even the worst teams, they have sold out gyms. So I really say this is what we've all been asking for as a community, as a city, and this is our chance. This is our chance to really get on the map. Like, hey, no matter what this team's doing, when you come to Orlando, it's going to be a dogfight. This crowd's going to be in it. That's what these other schools are hanging their hat on, and I think this is our chance to really put our name on it. Like, hey, UCF was, they were good. They were a challenge, and it was just a hard place to play because we do know when we show up, we can play with the best of them, especially at home.
One thing that kind of stood out to me about the schedule, I don't know if you guys caught up on this, 15 of the 18 conference games are either Wednesday or Saturday. There's like 3 Tuesday games, I believe, which is so, like, I would imagine as a coach and a player, you got to like that from a routine standpoint compared to the American, Ben, which the arrows all over the place. There were nights we're playing Thursday and then Sunday and then Wednesday and then Saturday. Like, it was all over the place because the Americans trying to find TV slots. Big 12 doesn't have to fight for TV slots. They are the TV slots in their own deal, although we don't have to worry about TV slots. But what do you think about that? I think that could help this group, having that kind of, you're going to play, for the most part, Wednesdays and Saturdays. I think that helps. Am I on? Is there something there?
It definitely helps. I mean, Coach Dawkins, he has a Duke background, right? Coach K is disciplined to the T's, and Coach Dawkins is no different. So as far as having that routine and regiment, playing those games on those days is really helpful. I think the thing is with this conference is the travel. When you have those stretches where we have, the one that stuck out to me was Texas Tech and BYU. So, each game was about 3 days apart. So a travel schedule for that might be you leave the day before you play Texas Tech, then you leave that night and go straight to BYU. Probably.
I was going to say, Ben, the 2 back-to-backs, you mentioned it, for those that may not have caught it, at Texas Tech, February 10th, at BYU, February 13th. The other one is Wednesday, January 17th, UCF's at Texas. Saturday, January 20th, they're at Houston. Could we see the team play there and stay in town and maybe bus, or like you in the case from Lubbock to Provo, just take the flight? In other words, not come back to Orlando, kind of stay there to saving some rest, because it's kind of hectic to go back and forth. I remember last year, I believe you guys went from Tulsa to Philadelphia.
Yeah.
So you've done that before. Could we see that with these 2 back-to-backs where they maybe stay in that area instead of going to Orlando and back? Yeah,
I would expect so, for sure. I mean, for a million reasons, right? So you can get a practice in the city that you're in. You might even practice before you travel to the next place the next day. In the case of Houston and Texas, they might drive right after the game and then be up there, practice the next day or practice the next 2 days, have the film, and just, it's an easier way to kind of keep the distractions low. Keep guys rested, let them get their rest, because that travel does, even though they do fly charter, it's still taxing. I mean, cramming 7-footers on a plane is never a good time. So, if you can stay, they definitely will do that.
Ben, what's 1 or 2 areas that you think UCF's going to have to quickly adjust to in the Big 12? If it is outside shooting, is it physicality? Is it size, speed? Are there a couple areas that that, hey, we're going to have to adjust to these things if we want to kind of bring our game to that level?
I don't know if it's one thing that I would say across the conferences is the biggest challenge. The thing that I would say is the challenge is the different looks that you're going to get on a nightly basis, right? So there's not going to be really any regiment to the style of play and how guys are trying to attack you. Kansas State versus Kansas versus BYU, they all will have dramatically different styles on how they want to get after you. But I think the consistent thing is every team in this conference plays extremely hard. I remember watching Texas Tech last year. I think they were playing Baylor in a tight one. And, guys are on a Tuesday or Monday, big Monday, and they're jumping in the crowd and flying all over the place. And Baylor's clearly having a little bit better season than Texas Tech, not really playing for tournament things at this point, stuff like that. And these dudes are still, diving through the wall. So going against guys that, really have NBA aspirations on a nightly basis, you see the difference, right? So it's going to come in a million different ways. And I think that will be the adjustment. Like, these guys this team's trying to pound it inside. This team's going to shoot us to death. This team's going to try to press us and rough us off like this team. So it's going to be a different threat almost every other night.
Let's talk about, a couple of teams here. You mentioned we're opening at Kansas State. By the way, what is it about the conference wanting UCF Kansas State football, men's hoops? We don't have to worry about this. Are they going to open in baseball? Do they have baseball in Manhattan, Kansas? I don't know. But obviously Jerome Tang's done a great job at Kansas State there. Got within a shot or two of the Final Four last year. Yep. But obviously January 10th, going to be a historic day on campus. The first home game against Kansas. My goodness. Ben, you played. Describe, what does it mean? What is it going to mean for those players to play Kansas, to see that jersey at Addition Financial Arena? Describe that, because that's going to be historic.
It's going to be what I would say potentially sleepless nights, where you're just overwhelmed with excitement, right? Those are the things as a basketball player you dream about, just getting those opportunities to play those blue bloods. Especially now that it's an in-conference game, it's going to be on national TV. You're like, hey, man, this is my chance to really, showcase what I can do. Like, there's no better measuring stick than, what did Joe Lunardi put them as a 1 seed? Not that matters, but, in a preseason.
They're a preseason number 1 in many of the publications, probably,
yep.
when the season starts.
Yep, exactly. So it's a game that you're like, hey, I can have a horrible season, but if I have a good game against Kansas, it can almost make up for it as an athlete in your mind. You're like, hey, this is a game that I can almost, I could tell my grandkids about. So you might not think that far along, but you're just really, really hyped about the opportunity. And you're like, man, what will be better than, going for 30 against Bill Self in the Kansas Jayhawks? Like, that's stuff legends are made of.
All right, Ben, now you get to deal with crazy fan media conspiracy theories. So here's a question for you. How much of an adjustment do you think the team's going to have to make to the officiating in the Big 12? Obviously, they haven't been officiated by Big 12 crews before. They're the new kid on the block. There's always these conspiracy theories that you got to earn your stripes, right? You got to earn your calls. You're the new kid on the block. A, do you think there's any truth to that at all? And B, how much of an adjustment do you think the team's going to have to make to Big 12 officiating, which obviously is different from conference to conference?
I actually don't think it'll be as much of an adjustment, just because one thing that we talk about as far as the American it's a pretty physical conference. So that's typically where the adjustment has to come. I mean, like, we play Houston twice every year, and like they come in ready to just, we can get into a wrestling match. And we know that. We played USF, not one of the better teams in the conference, but we're literally known for trying to just try to rough us up. So it's not something that we're, unfamiliar with as a group. I think what it'll be is what the road game officiating will be like. I think specifically the road games, when those gyms are packed, they don't like to see their home teams lose. That is just one thing that we do know, especially from your old blue bloods. So when we're at Texas, we're at Kansas State, those are places, at West Virginia, those are places that, just kind of in your head. If it's a 50-50 call, it will most likely go the other way. It's just, since the beginning of college basketball, it's just something that, people point. I've played, and, I don't have enough to say they're wrong. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, I think that's pretty fair. I think I think that's a pretty valid. Let me put you now here as a fan. Because there's fans, for example, there's some fans, friends of mine, they're kind of waiting to when UCF goes to Kansas so they can visit Fog Alley, for example, as a bucket list. Obviously, that's not going to be this year. Of the road trips this year, if I told you could go a free flight to any of the road games, which one would you pick as the one just to experience it? Which road game would you like there? You got Kansas State to open. That's historic. That'll be the first Big 12 game. At Texas, could be the first and last time ever UCF plays at Texas because they're moving to the SEC. At Houston, we've been there, done that, played there. There was a college game day there, in fact, in 2019 when UCF beat Houston. Cincinnati, same thing. Texas Tech and Lubbock, Provo, BYU, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, TCU. What would you pick?
So for me personally, it would be at Texas. And then, of course, at Kansas, when that moment does come, that is one that would tie that for me. But at Texas, as far as our schedule is concerned, and this is one thing that kind of leans on like why I think UCF, especially in the future, is like we have an opportunity to really, turn this thing up. Because as far as those cities, they don't have as much to offer as Orlando does. And Austin is a great city, and their gym and arena, as far as when they are really good, that place gets loud. Being from the DC area, I'm a Kevin Durant fan. So, watched a lot of Texas basketball when he was there. I know that place gets loud. It can get raucous, and it's a great place, especially if, UCF goes in there and shocks the world, to go out there after and have a drink.
There you go. How about the Drake there? There you go. Texas Elite 8 team, too, by the way. Another Elite 8. It's just unbelievable. The list of teams here, the resumes. Texas is a pretty good choice. Everybody loves Austin, Adam.
Austin is great.
I'm actually heading to Austin for a wedding in February, so I will report back and let you know. But I've got friends who live there, and they love. Apparently, it's gotten crowded over the last couple of years. It used to be kind of a sort of a hidden gem, but now it's definitely gotten more crowded with the tech companies moving out there. So I think it's a little packed there. But I'll take one for the team, guys. I'll take one for the team. I'll go check it out for you, and I'll report back.
You can't move that wedding to January so you could go to the game?
I mean, I'll see what I can do. I don't know how much pull I have. So cousin-in-law there. Ben, you look at the schedule, right? What in your mind, again, I'm going to ask you the same question about non-conference as I did conference. What's a reasonable expectation for wins? When you see the schedule, you know the teams, you know where you are. What's a reasonable number that, again, as a fan, we all do that thing where we go win, loss, win, loss, win, loss, right? If you kind of go down in your head, what do you see as a reasonable number of wins on that conference side?
So I think I've been racking my brain on this one. I figured this question was coming because I'm looking at it and I'm like, this is tough. Like, even the wins that you circle, you're like, this is a tough one. But I would say a reasonable high positive look is around 4 games, I would say. And I know the night faithful would be like, that's not a good number. But again, we talked about those quad 1 wins. Get about 3 more of those with a solid non-conference. You're an at-large bid, or at least on the bubble, hunting for it. So coming out with 4, which would exceed expectations for what we're projected as, I think that is something that we can do. My faith in Darius and CJ and Coach Dawkins, I think that is something that is very reasonable. It's a lot of ifs next to each win just because it's dependent on, how things shape out. But I think around 4 wins would be a goal number, a good number. If we walk out of the season with that number out of this conference, I'd be like, yeah, we're here to stay. And we will have sent a solid enough message around the league, like, hey, we're only going to get better.
I remember Miami when they joined the Big East, when it was really the Big East. Leonard Hamilton, they won 1 game the first year they joined the league. It worked out in the long run. So to your point, it's only year 1. It's just going to be part of a process there. This is the strongest league in the sport. Many people compare this to be the strongest league since the Big East of the 80s, the ACC of the 90s. Adam, you just had a guest on recently that talked about the Big 12 tournament maybe being the premier conference tournament in college basketball in Kansas City.
I don't see how you can argue against it. I don't see how you could say there's a better conference tournament in the country. I mean, when you got 3 teams coming in probably top 10 preseason, like top 10, like we're not even talking top 25, we're talking top 10, like the number of teams that will end up going to the NCAA tournament out of this conference, I think, might even come close to pushing record status as far as, so
right.
is going to be
crazy.
crazy.
There was talk last year at one point about 10 teams getting in. I think they ended up at around 7 or 8. There's talk about 8 teams this year, maybe more. I mean, Baylor, we haven't even talked about Baylor. They've got a potential lottery pick on their roster that's going to be playing here. I mean, for Baylor, all these teams have just amazing talent. It's unbelievable basketball. And I think that's the thing we're going to learn a lot is the high level of quality on a nightly basis in this league.
And I would say, I mean, we talked about places to go. I mean, on my bucket list might be the Big 12 tournament. I mean, the number of teams and the way that these fans love to travel. I mean, you'll be in for a time, whether your team's in it or not. Like, you're like, I'm going to watch some of the best basketball in the world and the future NBA stars, the teams that are going to the Final Four all in one place. It gets no better.
Ben, I want to wrap up with this. What does UCF need to do with this schedule in terms of recruiting? Obviously, if we want to continue to make inroads in the Big 12, what do you want to see from Johnny and his staff as it relates to this in recruiting? And how can UCF maximize on this schedule in that first year to really continue to be more aggressive on the recruiting trail?
I think the main thing is just showing you're competitive, right? So I think there's a lot of things that go into it now. I mean, the NIL stuff is going crazy. That's a whole separate, conversation. But I think the main thing will be, Coach Dawkins, and he's a competitor to his core. I mean, we went bowling last weekend and he was trying to beat me in that, right? At a friend's birthday party. So like, that dude is super competitive and so you can expect that he's going to be giving it all he has. So if these guys can kind of make sure we're playing all close games, and as long as these home gyms are packed out, I think the players will come. I mean, we're in untapped territory that's not as recognized on the national stage, which we will be after this season. And if we can show some like, hey, this is a crazy place to play. This is a place that, you will get that shine. You will get that recognition. And this is the schedule that we have. You'll get the guys.
Well, how'd that bowling turn out, by the way? Did you win that? I have to know who's a better bowler. Did you kick his ass? What happened there?
It was close, but I squeaked it out.
Oh, breaking right there. Breaking news.
Squeaked it out. So, I'm sure he's like, oh, you told him on the podcast. I'm like, I got with Coach.
Sorry,
Dawkins,
Coach. That's my bad, Coach. It's on me. That's E on me. That's my fault. I'll run a suicide after the show to make up for it. But hey, Ben, this is a lot of fun, man. We definitely appreciate you joining us tonight. Look forward to having you on maybe throughout the rest of the season as we get closer to tip off, to break down games for us and give us some more insight as well too. So where can people follow you and find you if they want to get you in social media or anything like that? Where can people find you?
So I guess Instagram, bhaze12 is my Instagram handle, and Twitter. I'm not on Twitter very often, but Instagram definitely on there. I mean, not the craziest follow, but you'll see some of those guys that I work out from time to time. Definitely like to give a little preview of some of the stuff that we're doing behind the scenes and just let people know that, your guys are working. We're definitely putting in that work to, give ourselves a chance, man. We're just happy to be here. I know these guys are excited about it.
I know we are too. Look forward to the season starting. And Ben, we'll catch up with you real soon. Thanks a lot.
Hey, thanks for having me.